Hello, everyone, on this wonderful Friday. Welcome to today's webinar with our government relations team, Bill and Mike. And before we get started, I would just briefly like to remind everyone this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available on our website within 24 hours of airing. You do have access to closed captions. You can turn the captions on if you choose to. Please do drop any questions for Bill or Mike using the Q&A feature. You can ask your questions at any time, and please remember you may remain anonymous. It is up to Mike and Bill when they choose to answer your questions. And without any further ado, I would like to hand it over to Bill. Thanks, Bill.
First of all, thanks, Belma. Thank you for putting this together. And thank you to everybody for taking time out of their busy schedules to join us on a Friday afternoon in late February. It would be an understatement to say that there has been a lot of action here in Washington, D.C. And we just simply, within higher education, and we simply just wanted to take the opportunity to provide an update on what we hear and what we are seeing here on the ground. So with that, I just want to move forward with the next slide, and just going to go do a quick overview about what we're going to cover today: education leadership, regulations, executive orders, the Department of Education, this little thing called reconciliation, and also tax cuts, as well as some of the other items that are still pending that could impact our industry. So first of all, I want to talk about education leadership. We've had a really large turnover in leadership within the congressional space. The new chair of the higher education, the education committee in the Senate is Mr. Cassidy from Louisiana, and the ranking member is Mr. Sanders from Vermont. In the House, we have Mr. Wahlberg, who has taken over the gavel from Miss Dr. Fox. But just know that Dr. Fox will still be part of the higher education subcommittee in the House. And we also have Mr. Scott, who will continue to be the ranking member in the House. To put it shortly, we have 3 new leaders within the congressional space. The only remaining leader from the previous Congress is Mr. Scott. I'm sure everybody's heard about the Department of Education Secretary, Linda McMahon. There was a hearing last week. There was a committee vote yesterday, and it's expected that she will probably be voted upon early next week and confirmed by the Senate. Just as interestingly, which we haven't seen as much news about, is the undersecretary. And I focus on the undersecretary simply because he truly is the individual. This is the individual that's going to be focusing on the administration's policy within the higher education space. Mr. Kent previously was a lobbyist for career education colleges and universities. Thank you. Next one.
So speaking of
at this juncture, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Mike Billfinger, who also works with me in the government relations space.
Didn't mean to jump the gun there, sorry.
No worries.
Speaking of, I think it's kind of timely that we're turning it over on Nick Kent. So he's been an open critic of gainful employment regulations. So his previous organization that he worked for represents for-profits. So he's kind of been weary of how the Biden administration treated for-profits. Speaking of gainful employment and financial value transparency, I don't know about you guys, but I've had quite the time trying to keep up with all of the back and forth with deadlines. This is a regulation that goes all the way back starting in 2011, where there was 3 failed neg reg processes, one in 2011, one in 2015, one in 2019. Fast forward and to the current one, we originally had the reporting deadline of October 30th. This got pushed back to January 15th, which then got pushed back to February 18th, which now got pushed back to September 30th. So the current deadline for debt reporting as well as the completers list is September 30th. There was not an injunction, a stay, excuse me, issued, a 90-day stay filed on request of the administration to allow for the political appointees in the department to come in and get themselves situated and reevaluate these regulations. So the department has until May 16th, 2025 to respond to that. Yeah. Moving along with regulations, another big one that AACRAO's been engaging with has been distance education. So distance education, earlier last year, there was a neg reg process where AACRAO submitted comments to the department. There was a number of things in the proposed regulations that were of concern for us. For instance, the proposed regulations required attendance, and attendance here wasn't just a simple roll call, it was regular and substantive interaction. That did not make it into the final regulations. The proposed regulations they disallowed for asynchronous clock hour programs to access federal financial aid. The final regulations, they still allow for these students enrolled in these programs to access the federal financial aid system. A few things I want to just note that also made it into the final regulations. The final regulations, so although they don't require the reporting of an additional location, this is another comment that we submitted to the department that was of concern to AACRAO. So we were happy to see that not included in the final regulations. However, instead of that additional virtual locations, students will be reported to NSLDS as enrolled in either in-person or distance or hybrid if they're in a distance education program starting on July 1st, 2027. So there is still, although there isn't the reporting of additional virtual locations, there still will be some additional reporting that's going to be part of NSLDS that's going to be starting in July 1st, 2027. In addition to distance ed, we also got finalized regulations for return to Title IV, R2T4, and TRIO programs. Initially, the department had sought to address cash management, state authorization, and accreditation. However, those did not make it into the final package. And you're
Mike, I'm going to just jump in really quickly. The regulations that we're talking about go into effect in July of 2026, but reporting will not be required until 2027.
Correct. Yeah. It's a good catch. Lastly, regulation related. So the court, there's an injunction, I believe it was out of Texas, but it's a national injunction on the threshold for when a worker becomes eligible for overtime. So due to that injunction, we're right now at status quo of 35,500 is the income threshold for a salaried employee to be eligible for overtime. Next slide. I'm gonna turn it back over to Bill here.
Sorry about that. We've been living in this space for how many years, and we still forget to put the audio button on. Let's just jump right into the executive orders. The administration provided 26 executive orders on the first day. To date, that was, and I apologize, as of last Friday, it was 45 to date. Just to put that in perspective, Mr. Biden put in 9 executive orders on the first day. There are some larger issues that everybody's obviously focusing on. First one is birthright citizenship and the 14th Amendment that is being challenged in the courts. And so that is going to be pretty much the theme of our presentation, that the courts are going to have a lot of say in this, a lot of these executive orders. We know that there has been a lot of chatter and a lot of talk and a lot of concern regarding immigration and ICE individuals showing up on campus. Please know that AACRAO has had communications with NACUA, the President's Alliance, and we've had conversations. We expect to have a webinar for the members with NACUA in the upcoming couple weeks. And so we want to be able to, via service, to provide a little bit more clarity in this space. In addition, we know that a lot of questions have been raised, and we hope to be able to have a webpage resource up next week that will provide guidance, legal guidance, as well as statements from different associations in regards to this very controversial executive order in regards to immigration. But we do know that the executive order did rescind protections for sensitive areas, such as churches, hospitals, and schools and college campuses. We know that if there's a court order to search in a location, then a university administrator would have to open the door to ICE agents. We know that there is a difference between judicial orders and administrative orders, and ICE agents normally go into locations based on administrative orders. Judicial orders come from a bench, and there's a huge difference between the differentiation of that. And again, we hope to provide more clarity around those two scenarios in the near future. We know that ICE cannot enter private areas like dorms or other non-public buildings without a judicial warrant. Again, coming from the bench. Again, what I just mentioned, an administrative warrant doesn't hold the same legal force. I know that is subject to interpretations, and for that, we encourage everybody to make sure that you touch base with a point person on your campus, especially for legal advice in regards to what an institution must, should, would have to do when somebody provides an administrative warrant versus a judicial warrant. That's especially very, very important. The question is that this directive could impact individuals who are undocumented students. We've seen the operation of legal aid clinics specifically for individuals who are born in the USA but don't have parents who are here legally in regards to trying to fill up the FAFSA. We've seen a diminishing outreach to assist those individuals in filling out the FAFSA. And the whole issue of in-state tuition to undocumented individuals is also up for conversation. Florida just recently introduced legislation to rescind the ability for undocumented students to receive in-state tuition. We know that there are 25 states that currently offer in-state tuition for undocumented students, but this could now become a very much a political issue. Again, we hope to provide more guidance and information and resources, hopefully starting next week.
Just one little tidbit about the Florida legislation that has been that is now law. DeSantis didn't originally. There was a bit of whether he was going to sign it, but he did end up signing it. So if you're in Florida, undocumented students are no longer eligible for in-state tuition. So in a callback to Trump's first term, in the flurry of executive actions that he's signed thus far, one of them was targeting immigration and visa processing. So this order directs the State Department and Homeland Security to ensure that all applicants, quote, do not bear hostile attitudes. What is a hostile attitude? That the order does not define what a hostile attitude is. Um, so this is undoubtedly, we're already seeing that it's having an effect on the processing of F1 and J1 visas that our international students need to come study in the US. This order, the administration's justification for this is that it's in order to align all policies and programs with an America First approach and to make them accountable to Trump as the executive. He's the elected official. We could see some impacts on State Department funded international exchange and study abroad programs. So for instance, Fulbright here could be impacted or other ones as a result of this executive action. Again, very similar to some of the impacts that we saw during Trump's first administration.
Yeah, Mike, and I will just say that this is a developing situation, and AACRAO is part of a larger coalition of associations that are concerned regarding international students being able to come to the United States. And we are working in conjunction with other higher education associations to ensure fair treatment of individuals who are trying to come to the United States to study or who have been requested or invited to teach in the United States. I will say that one of the executive orders that completely impacts higher ed, it calls for the removal of non-binary, let me try this again, non-binary identity on the FAFSA form. Thanks, Mike. Again, we're a part of a coalition of higher education associations. We were in a call with them, with the department last week. The question came up of the executive order, and it was confirmed that that change would transpire from the date that the executive order went forward. So if an individual had already started a FAFSA form and identified themselves how they wish to identify, that individual would not need to go back and change anything on the FAFSA form. It was just going to be moving forward. Regarding Title IX, due to various injunctions that were raised with the Title IX guidance proposal from the Biden administration, the current administration has just said that it will return to guidance from the first Trump administration, which specifically identifies restroom based on biological sex, only recognizes two genders, does not recognize gender identity, and also goes back to one of the large changes that the previous guidance from the department regarding Title IX, the due process ability for individuals accused of sexual assault, allow them to be able to cross-examine their accuser. And also, it's important to know that the jurisdiction to incidents that are only focused on taking place on campus, and also more narrowly defines sexual harassment. Another executive order that came out is to be noted by institutions that NIL payments must be proportionate. Again, we use those words in parentheses because it doesn't specify what proportionate means. It doesn't say 90-10, 80-20, 50-50, 60-40. That is obviously subject to interpretation. So another issue probably is going to be raised up by the courts between male and female athletes in order to be in compliance with Title IX. Another executive order regarding transgender students, it specifically bans transgender women from participating in women's sports. And it calls on the Secretary of Education to prioritize Title IX enforcement actions against institutions, including systems such as, let's just talk about the Big Ten, SEC, and to have that deny females the equal opportunity to participate in sports and athletic events by requiring them in the women's category to compete with or against or appear unclothed before males.
Another one of Trump's early executive orders directs the Office of Civil Rights within the Department of Education to basically take a more aggressive stance when it comes to investigating anti-Semitism in higher ed. So it allows OCR to reconsider closed investigations on ethnic and religious discrimination. And it kind of sets up a task force or encourages collaboration between the Department of Justice and OCR in order to take action against any students seen as sympathetic or who are supportive of anti-Semitic groups. We've already seen some OCR has already kind of followed through on some of the indications in this executive order. So OCR has opened up an investigation at 5 higher education institutions. What is kind of significant about this one is these were self-initiated investigations, meaning OCR did not receive a formal complaint from a student or a group prior to opening their investigation. The executive order goes on to instruct the department to provide guidance for colleges and universities on how to comply with the 2023 SFFA versus Harvard Supreme Court ruling that forbid the consideration of race in admissions practices. Next slide. The executive order goes on to designate all institutions that receive financial aid as subcontractors, and as such, they shall, quote, not consider race, color, sex, sexual preference, religion, or national origin in their programs or hiring decisions. So this was language that already was coming prior to the Dear Colleague letter that was just announced last Friday. And lastly, that executive order on anti-Semitism/DEI commissions the department to conduct an investigation of up to 9 colleges with endowments worth more than $1 billion in order to ensure their compliance. Speaking of the Dear Colleague letter, I'd be remiss not to speak in it. So last Friday, the acting director of the Office of Civil Rights released a Dear Colleague letter that informs higher ed of essentially a new interpretation of federal anti-discrimination law. And it threatens institutions or encourages institutions, I'm gonna stick with it, of possible cuts to federal funding if they continue diversity, equity, inclusion programs for 14 days, starting 14 days from when the letter was initially dropped. So that would be starting not this Friday, but next Friday, February 28th. I think it's important to keep in mind here that Dear Colleague letters, they are not law. They do not carry the same weight as a regulation. They did not go through a neg-reg process with required opportunity for public to submit comment. So although this letter threatens action, it does not carry the same weight as if there was something with congressional approval behind it or that had gone through a formal negotiated rulemaking process.
Let me just jump in here, Mike. Doug asked a question. I hope that we just answered that, Doug. It does not carry the same weight. It doesn't have any enforceable actions. It's just guidance. As Mike mentioned, did not go through the regulatory process, did not go through the legislative process. And so that is the guidance is still subject to broad interpretation. And I think, no, we should not feel free to ignore it. I think it's a serious matter. And I think that all institutions should make sure that they are not going to be subject to any negative actions from the Department of Education.
So, like Bill noted, it is, although it doesn't have the same weight as law, it is still of great concern. And AACRAO's executive director, Melanie Gottlieb, has we've issued a statement responding to this Dear Colleague letter. We're expecting a lot more statements going to be coming out from higher ed. We're right now coordinating with ACE, who were a member of the Washington Higher Education Secretariat, to develop a response with our other sister associations there. Expect more, that this is an ongoing story, and we will be, if you're not in the exchange, it can be a great space to go and see community, express any challenges you're having, share with one another, because we know this can be a really, really challenging time for folks. Two quick things. One, I saw someone ask about slides. Yes, our slides will be available along with the recording of this presentation after it concludes. Second, Bill, I do see that we have one attendee who has their hand raised. Do we want to take questions now, or do we want to hold those to the end?
I would suggest holding it to the end, because there's a lot of information still to be shared.
Okay. Olivia Dodson, I hope I'm pronouncing that. Please feel free to put your question in the chat or the Q&A, and we will get to it. I'll try to remember that. Next slide, Belma.
So this is something that I do want to spend a good portion of this conversation is something called ICA. It's something that some of you may or may not be familiar with. It's called obviously, I put it on there, Empowerment Control Act. It was implemented in the 1970s after Watergate. The administration believes that ICA is unconstitutional. The reasoning behind ICA, it was to create checks and balances of what the executive branch could reallocate funds approved by Congress. Again, this goes towards the whole conversation of review of grants and federal freezes that transpired a couple weeks ago, but then was rescinded. And specifically, the act restricts and makes conditions to the ability of the president to reallocate funds that's already been approved by a federal agency. Next slide. The goal of the administration is essentially to override ICA. I will jump to the main architect behind this is the director of OMB, the most powerful agency that a lot of people really don't necessarily know about. He was the previous director of OMB at the end of the previous administration. His name is Russell Voigt, and he was the founder of Center for Renewing America, which was a nonprofit that focused on anti-DEI issues. He was also a huge player in the creation of Project 2025. The goal of the administration is essentially to broaden the executive branch's power not to spend money that has been already appropriated by Congress. This is not going away. The goal of the administration is essentially to try to take this to the Supreme Court and try to override ICA and strike it down and make it unconstitutional.
Continuing on the trend of happy, positive news, I'm sure we've all heard the whispers. The Department of Ed will likely be taking a significant haircut, if not being abolished. The White House has confirmed its intention to issue an executive order that is going to essentially set up kind of a two-stage dismantling of the department. So stage one is going to be identifying activities or funding that the department does that is statutorily required, that is written into law. And there are some examples of this that even predate the department itself. So for instance, FSA, Pell, OCR, these are all established by Congress, but in particular, TRIO, FERPA, these are both predate the education department entirely. TRIO was established in 1964, FERPA was enacted in 1974, and it wasn't until 1979 that Department of Education was split off from a pre-existing department. So step one of this executive order, which we're expecting is going to be signed after McMahon is confirmed, because it's going to set off kind of a timer. So Trump doesn't want to set a ticking time bomb in terms of a deadline that McMahon will have to meet without her being in the role. So we're expecting at least not until next Friday, if not later, this executive order will come out. The second part of the executive order is going to be identifying any activities or funding the department's engaged in that is not statutorily required, and trying to wind these down, if not eliminate these, as soon as possible. Before we go getting too doom and gloom, there is some silver lining about this situation. So in 2023, last time that the Department of Ed, we had a conversation about eliminating it. 60 Democrats joined all, or excuse me, 60 Republicans joined all Democrats in voting no to abolishing the department. And at the time that legislation was introduced with only 6 co-sponsors. There is a bill currently, HR 899, to abolish the department. It currently has 33 co-sponsors. So certainly an indication there's more political will, but co-sponsors does not mean votes. That is not any indication of how it will actually perform on the floor. And critically, 7 Democratic senators would need to vote with all Republicans in order to abolish the department. So that remains highly unlikely that those 7 Democratic senators would say yes to that proposal. Next slide. So like I mentioned, in the short term, it's going to be identifying what is not statutorily required and winding that down. In the long term, what is statutorily required and where might be a better place to offload that? So for instance, could the Office of Civil Rights be better served if it was in the Department of Justice? Could federal student aid be better served if it was in the Department of Treasury? McMahon, during her confirmation hearing, she did seem to recognize that Congress would have a role in getting rid of the department, and seemed to indicate her willingness to work with them as she works to pare down its activities and offload what she can. Regardless of whether or not the department goes away or not, it does seem pretty clear that in 4 years, the department will be very different than what it is today, and it will be a shell of itself in many, many ways. I don't think it's likely that it's going to disappear entirely, but I do think that we need to have honest and potentially difficult conversations about what do we do if Pell might not disappear, but maybe we don't fund Pell at 100%. So if 10 students apply, there's only enough funding for the first 7. What would that mean to your institution if you don't have as many Pell recipient students coming in? Again, not a guarantee of the future, but I do think it's important that we start having these conversations and looking to our community. What can we do to prepare?
Mike, let me just jump in there. And I think it's important to note that we're getting kind of differing messaging from the prospective Secretary of Education, and also the messaging that's coming from the administration, believing that we have ICA on the floor, but yet the prospective Secretary of Education is saying that Congress controls the purse strings, and they don't necessarily have the right to rescind any contracts that have already been awarded. So this is a murky area. We are all following it just as much as you are. But I do think it's important for everybody to kind of understand what ICA is, because that's the long game. That really is the long game for what the administration is trying to push. Lost amidst all the executive orders and a lot of the stuff that's come out over the last month is that one of the main pushes of this administration is to provide a continuation to the tax cuts that were passed within the first administration. They're set to expire at the end of this year, and it's a major push for the administration to continue to not only have them, but also expand them. This is going to be moved forward via a vehicle called reconciliation, which is a vehicle that's rarely used. The last two times that it has been utilized was last time to pass the tax cuts, and this is the mechanism that the Obamacare health legislation was passed. It is very focused. It is very specific. It has to deal specifically with funding. It cannot deal with other matters. And it's the most interesting thing is that it's not subject to the 60 vote filibuster mechanism. So in other ways, if you're going to provide some kind of tax cut, it's got to be paid for by something else. It's in essence the robbing Peter to pay Paul, but you can't just say it out there. It has to be, and many times, paid for. The goal is to pass such a package by Memorial Day. Talking to many folks, I think that is a aggressive timeline, considering that so many jurisdictions, i.e. committees, have to mark up their own bills and to be rolled up into one budgetary bill. There was a document that was released, well, that was leaked, I should say, which was a 51-page document from the budget committee on quote unquote how they would pay for these tax cuts. And there's 51 pages, lots of it in many different ways, but I simply just wanted to highlight a couple of the aspects that will impact higher education. The first one is the endowment tax from the current level of 1.4 would be increased to 14%. It would look to tax scholarships and fellowship income. It would repeal the Save Biden plan, which specifically streamlines and focuses on income-driven repayment plan. It would repeal borrower defense and repayment discharge regulations. It would repeal close and discharge regulations. The borrower defense, that's for anybody that quote unquote was defrauded and did not receive what they were promised from an institution. It would eliminate nonprofit status for hospitals. And this one I just put it in there for everybody. It would eliminate the home mortgage interest deduction for everybody. So those are just some of the mechanisms that they're looking to help offset the tax package through the reconciliation process. The one thing that we did want to focus on, which has been given a lot of conversation, specifically because it was marked up last year under Chairwoman Fox and was scored by the Congressional Budget Office at providing a cost saving of $180 billion over 10 years. Next one. Now, we don't know what's going to be in this tax package. All we can speculate is that it'll include a lot of things that were included in CCRA. It does include reverse transfer. It does double the max Pell Grant for juniors and seniors who are on track to graduate on time. It repeals gainful employment and financial value transparency regs, prevents interest from capitalizing on student loans, and simplifies student loan repayment process, and would require students only to pay back what they would have owed on a 10-year standard repayment plan. Those are some of the things that we as higher education have reviewed and think that they would be positive. However, with any piece of legislation, there's always good and bad. The legislation, again, we haven't seen what the reconciliation package would include, but if it includes CCRA, it would eliminate FSEO grants, eliminates a plus loans for graduates and parents, changes the overall need analysis formula that could negatively impact low-income students. It would make institutions responsible, this is a big one, for loans that former students don't pay off. It would repeal the 90-10 rule. Next. It would establish loan caps. You see the amounts. I think the one that most is interesting is $150,000 for professional, which we interpret that to be doctors or other highly skilled individuals. It includes a risk-sharing proposal. So in addition to unpaid student loans, institutions would also need to enter into risk-sharing proposal, which NICU has estimated that 86% of institutions would be required to make an annual payment to Department of Education. And can you go back? And it also creates a post-secondary student data system, which many of our members are very concerned about in regards to student privacy. Some of the other items that we're kind of focusing on, these two are tied. Well, they're all tied. So the tax package, the continuing resolution, the debt ceiling, those are all kind of tied together. If you guys have been following it. So just to everybody make sure, we are still under a continuing resolution for a budget that went into effect last September. And we're still trying to approve last year's budget for this year. Within that process is the prospect of also including a debt ceiling, which would then allow Congress to pay for the tax cuts, because I'll explain it a little bit later in a couple bullet points, since the tax cuts that they're proposing in discretionary funds would not cover all of the tax cuts. We are still dealing with trying to address what the amount of funds that Congress is willing to spend this year. So we're still talking about budget resolutions for this year or next year. So we're still dealing with last year in order to get through September, but at the same time, we're trying to come up with caps for the upcoming year. And so both houses have to agree, and I'm literally going to make this up. Both houses have to agree that the total amount that they're going to spend is, and again, making this up, $1 million. Both the House and Senate have to agree that they're going to agree on caps, that Congress will only pass $1 million budget. Again, hypothetical, obviously we know $1 million is, we're talking trillions, but there is disagreement between the House and the Senate leadership. The Senate is moving forward from with a two-bill process because they are hearing a lot of need, that the budget is running short on border and defense, and then they'll focus on tax cuts on the second half, again, with the goal of being able to complete this by Memorial Day. The House would include the tax cuts, and they're estimated to be at $4.7 trillion. And they would, again, with an increase in the debt ceiling, and would look to cut approximately, now it's been agreed on, at $2 trillion in discretionary funding. But some of the hardliners are demanding $2.5 trillion. The other large issue that we're obviously following is the indirect cost cap that NIH recently implemented, and it was led by ACE, APLU, AAU, and a slew of R1 institutions against it. Some of the indirect cost rates at some of those R1s are estimated to be 30, 40, 50% of the grant. And so that would mean a tremendous cut in their grants if it would only be capped at 15%.
Oral arguments for that one, I think, are happening today for the NIH, that ACE, APLU, that case. So if you're not already subscribed to AACRAO transcript, please subscribe, because we will definitely, that is going to be something that we'll include in next week's edition, any outcomes that come out of that case.
So we have about 10 minutes for questions. We have gone through a lot of, we've kind of answered a lot of the questions as they have come up in the chat. Does anybody have any additional questions?
Michelle asked a question about how can we subscribe to AACRAO transcript? I'm going to put a link in the chat. If you go to that page on the right-hand side, you will see there's a little sign up to receive AACRAO transcript, and you can just put your email there and click join list.
And just so everyone knows, the AACRAO transcript is a kind of synopsis that the Government Relations Department puts out on a weekly basis that kind of highlights the main issues that we're hearing from both federal, state, industry, and opinion pieces that we think would be helpful to our members and our community in general. That's Mary. No idea in regards to Perkins. I have not heard any specific mention of Perkin loans. I do know that they're trying, that CCRA would try to minimize and try to streamline the number of different loan vehicles that are out there. And there is chatter, conversation, thoughts about outsourcing a lot of the federal funding loan processes to private companies.
Bill, are you able to talk at all about potential changes to international higher ed? I know I spoke briefly about some of his executive orders impact F1 and J1 visas. That's obviously going to then have a subsequent effect on international students. But any other details that you can share about what the administration might have in store when it comes to internationals?
Be quite honest with you, Mike, I thought that that was going to be one of the main pushing points that we saw at the first Trump administration, that came out with a lot of anti-immigration executive orders, but we have not seen a lot of movement within that space. I know that higher education is concerned about the visa approval process and what that will do specifically for the ability for some foreign individuals to be able to come and study in the United States, but we have not really seen anything substantive. I know that the part of the coalition that we are that's tracking issues within the international space, that has been one of our largest concerns.
The other thing I'll share is, well, not necessarily about international students specifically, but there has been some movement this Congress on a bill called Deterrent that would affect foreign gift giving to institutions, and would even make that limit as low as, I believe it's $0 for certain countries of concern, is how it
Yeah,
phrases
so
it.
Deterrent passed in the last Congress, and of special concern was something called Section 117 of the Deterrent Act. And what it had passed out of committee, but no action has been taken up in the Senate yet. And what essentially Deterrent would do, and I'm just utilizing the name of the legislation, is that it would reduce the amount of foreign gift giving or grants from the current level of $250,000 down to $50,000, and would also create a special category of countries of interest where that amount would be reduced to $0. Now, those countries of interest include Russia, China, Venezuela, I want to say Iran, but those are very specific in nature, meaning that even if it also would create a database of reporting. So let's just say that you go out and have a coffee with a colleague from any of those countries aforementioned, and they pay for it, you would then be required to report that under Deterrent in Section 117.
Another question we got was, any word if universities are considering any concrete steps at this time? Again, acknowledging that we're still early and things are a little chaotic, to combat some of the ramifications of these O's, particularly when it comes to finances. I'll just share briefly. I know that some R1 universities have joined ACE, APLU, AAU lawsuit against the NIH's indirect cost cap of 15%. That comes top of mind of something that universities are doing. Anything else, Bill, that you might want to share? Can you think of some concrete steps institutions are taking to combat the ramifications of these early executive actions?
executive orders. I know that a lot of associations are gathering resources, and we're trying to put together a kind of list of resources. I mean, in addition to what you're just saying about um, the NIH capping on 15% uh, indirect cost, I would say make sure that every institution has a method in place and a process in place in the instance that an ICE agent comes to campus, and make sure that your legal counsel um, provides absolute guidance. I've heard that many institutions have designated a specific point person to address any of those situations that arise, and that way individuals are not put in difficult situations.
I think we got time for one more. I'm gonna go to Cindy in chat asked, should we be rushing to change our catalogs where it mentions DEI policies? And one other attendee mentioned the resource from Educational Council. They released a briefing about uh, the Education Department's DEI Dear Colleague letter. I'll share a link in the chat here. It has some, I think, some pretty good analysis of the DEI letter, but also some at least initial recommendations that universities can consider with how to respond to that action.
Again,
Anything?
again, I would have a larger conversation on within the institution in regards to what your legal counsel recommends. The education council recommendations are amazing, and they also provide additional links to additional case law or interpretations that can serve to be really helpful for institutions. And so we're going to be developing a resource center, hopefully by the next week, where institutions can go, or our members can go and get additional information regarding what the options are.
Well, thank you so much. I'm sure that there might be some other questions that come up. So our contact information is up on the screen there. Please feel free to reach out to myself or to Bill. Also, we do monitor the exchange. So if you're in AACRAO Exchange and you send a message in the advocacy group or any of the other ones in Registrar Community Admissions, we try our best to monitor those, and we will try to respond. Um, Thank you so much, everyone, for attending today. We realize it's a big time of flux for higher ed, and we're all dealing with new challenges. So really rely on your community. We want AACRAO to be a place that you guys feel comfortable coming to for resources, but also for comfort for one another, for community. So please don't be strangers. Engage on the exchange. Feel free to send us emails if any other questions come up. And thank you so much for attending with us today.
Yeah, and I will just piggyback on what Mike said, is that now more than ever is when higher education needs to kind of come together and provide a unified voice. And ACRA will always continue to be focused on our values and advocating on behalf of our members, and trying to keep everybody as most informed as we possibly can. And so again, the slides will be available to everybody, and Mike and I are always here to be a resource for additional questions that anybody may have.